All
Hold on.
right. Welcome, everyone. My name is JC Moore. I'm with the Biodiversity Education and Awareness Network, or BEAN for short. BEAN is a working group alongside the Ontario Biodiversity Council to execute targets from the Ontario Biodiversity Strategy. So we aim to provide easy to follow and easy to understand lesson plans and activities to teachers and the public to learn more about biodiversity in Ontario. You can visit our website to learn more at biodiversityeducation.ca to learn more about these resources and the biodiversity here in Ontario. Today, I'm joined by Jody Allaire, the Director of Citizen Science and Community Engagement with Birds Canada. Welcome, Jody.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting me. Glad to be here. I'm going to jump right into my presentation, which is ways to help and connect with birds. And so I'm going to dive right in, and I'm going to cover a few different topics here, and then we can have a little discussion at the end. But also, JC, happy to dive into any subjects in more detail as I'm presenting as well as we go forward. So please feel free to interrupt so we can talk more about some of the stuff that I love talking about. So I'm going to lay out, why birds and why birds are such important indicators of measuring change to our environment, why they're important species for championing biodiversity. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges some of our birds are facing and what that says about their habitat associations. And then I'm going to finish off with a variety of ways that you can help birds. And that includes participating in volunteer-based programming, but also things you can do around the home for helping birds. So let's jump right in with the question that I get asked so often is, why birds? And well, really, I never know how to answer this question, really, because it's, why not birds? Really, they are fantastic. They're beautiful. They can fly. They've got incredible bird songs. They are common in our backyards and our local parks, but you can also find them all over the world too. Anywhere you go, you can find birds. And the more time you spend with birds, the more they capture your imagination, right? And these are some common murres here from Witless Bay off of St. John's, Newfoundland. A place where there's almost 1 million seabirds nesting, right? And if you've never experiencing that will really sort of change your life. So birds have this amazing ability when you hear them and you spend time with them, whether it's up at the cottage or some cool remote destination or even in your backyard. Birds have this ability to transform your views and perspectives of the natural world. They can help connect you with nature. And frankly, we need more of that. We need that all the time, right? I think the more we're connected to the natural world, the better we'll be in terms of the decisions we make, the policies we put in place, and generally just sort of how we care for the environment. And so birds have that ability. They're beautiful and they can connect. Now, you don't have to go to far off exotic places to really enjoy birds. Like I said, you can get amazingly beautiful birds right in your backyard. And one of the things that has really come from the pandemic, other than, lots of anxiety and stress, is that people really discovered birds this past year. People really started noticing birds and noticing the hope and the beauty and the inspiration that they can provide. And even in your own backyard. And I think this has been a really, if there is, there's very few positives that have come from a pandemic. This, I would argue, is one of them, that people were sort of rediscovering or discovering birds for the first time. And people are seeing that it's not, you don't have to fall into that birding stereotype of being the retired English teacher to be a birder. Like tons of young people from all backgrounds connecting to birds. And birding, one of the great things about birding, right, is that it's for everyone. Absolutely everyone and anyone can get involved with birding. Birds, that it doesn't matter how much money you make, what your education is, what type of equipment you have, none of that matters. Everyone can enjoy birds. And I think that's really the final thing that really does it for me, why I think birds are so important. And like I said, look at this gorgeous bird here. This is a Western tanager. And this was taken right outside my window. here in the yard last spring, right around this time of year, in fact, as they're migrating through to the boreal forest. So this is a species you find in Western Canada, not so much Eastern Canada. So apologies, Ontario. You've got scarlet tanagers, and they are nothing to shake a stick at. They are stunning. But like I said, this is just right outside my window during the pandemic, and these kind of experiences are, you can have these as well if you tune into birds. Okay, so let's talk about why we spend so much time focusing on birds and bird research and bird monitoring and birds as indicators. Yes, birds are studied a lot and are researched a fair bit, but there are reasons for this. One of the big reasons is that it's, compared to really any other taxa, birds are an easy and probably the most affordable subject matter in terms of monitoring. If you can compare it to any other taxa in terms of intensive monitoring, you're not going to get anywhere close to the bang for your buck in terms of the data, the amount of data you can collect from birds, both from a cost, but also from a volunteer perspective. Now, obviously, this isn't a volunteer program here. I studied bald eagles in Southern Ontario for many years, banding birds, putting satellite transmitters, doing blood sampling. Absolutely love this species, and really great that they are making such a fantastic comeback in Ontario, to the point where they're really not at risk anymore, which is astounding, right? Like, it's really great. It's a great example of what people can do if people in a variety of different groups and stakeholders join together collaboratively to try to do good. And saving bald eagles and peregrine falcons, herring gulls, and even double-crested cormorants back in the day, these are all examples of people collaboratively working together to achieve a conservation goal. And we're reaping the benefits of that right now. And I'd like to lay that out here first, because I'm going to show some examples where we really need to all step up to the plate to address some major conservation issues right now going forward. But this was also a species that people could relate to, connect with, and you had no trouble convincing people that we all need to be making some major policy changes in order to ban DDT and to protect our water in order to save birds like this. So birds actually play a really big role in galvanizing public support for the protection of habitat, for the protection of clean water. So birds are not to be underestimated in terms of their power.
Yeah, they're very they're like you said, they're very easy to connect with. Like, if I did a little bit of aquatics work, and you're talking about how the zooplankton or the macroinvertebrates in the water are disappearing, it's hard for people to kind of wrap their head around, and how a lot of those insects are indicators of a healthy stream or ecosystem. But if you kind of on the flip side of, if you see a blue heron near a water body, then that means that there's probably frogs or fish present. And if those frogs and fish are present, then that's a healthy ecosystem. So kind of, yeah, using them as those indicators of a species that's very tangible, like it's very easy to observe and connect with, for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. And don't get me wrong, I love insects and especially Lepidoptera and Orthopterans and yeah, certainly love natural history in general. It's not just birds for me, for sure. And yeah, absolutely, right? Birds are, a charismatic megafauna, you could argue, right? But we need that. We need that. We need those umbrella species and those poster birds out there to help galvanize. So as much as I love stoneflies and think they're just the coolest looking thing, not going to get a ton of support with a poster of a stonefly, which is a shame. To be honest, wouldn't that be great if people could understand the importance of caddisflies and stoneflies? But no, birds provide that surface, and they are they're arguably the best indicator of environmental change in the world. Even if they are maybe one or a couple steps removed or up the food chain, they still play a really major role in looking at environmental change, because they can be monitored easily, and they're so common, and it's easy to gather volunteer generated data And we'll talk about that a little bit more sort of towards the end. And speaking about aquatic invertebrates, so this is another species, a species at risk in Ontario called the Louisiana water thrush, one of my favorites. And this is a bird that I also studied for many years. And this is in fact my hand, my net's in the back. This is a bird very closely tied to an aquatic ecosystem and really are indicators of healthy aquatic environments. If you have Louisiana water thrushes in your streams or in your swampy forests in southwestern Ontario, you know you've got a pretty healthy aquatic environment. When you have perfect habitat for this species without Louisiana's in it, it is telling you something, you know, for sure. And this is a species that is in decline, really sort of across the range, and their northern range, which comes into Canada, because they rely on sort of pristine water. I find actually these in many ways are sort of associated with brook trout a lot, especially if you can find them, if you can still find brook trout in southwestern Ontario. They need that sort of clean water. But this, unlike the bald eagle, is not a bird that many people know about, which is a shame because look at it, it's gorgeous, right? Beautiful song. I love this bird. This is actually a male that I color banded, and it kept coming back to the same site for about 6 years. So I only caught and banded it once, and then I was able to just monitor it from a distance, and it had several different females over that time and numerous babies, and he was a great father. But it's a bird that goes unnoticed and people are just unaware. And I would argue this is the challenge we face now with birds and biodiversity, is that the birds we really need to be paying attention to now are no longer the bald eagle and the peregrine falcon. There are these other species, especially, and I'll pull specifically just from an Ontario example, birds like Louisiana water thrushes, prothonotary warbler, cerulean warbler. You know, these are the new birds at risk that unfortunately people just are not aware of as much. And that's our sort of a big challenge going forward. Okay. And like I said, this is sort of a classic Louisiana water thrush habitat. And interestingly, their sort of preferred sort of swamp forest habitat in southwestern Ontario are the most biodiverse parts of the entire province, period, in terms of tree species diversity, insects, herps, like you name it. These are the most biodiverse regions. So there is a connection with some of our rarest forest songbirds in southern Ontario and our most biodiverse regions that need protecting, right? So there's a good connection there. And lots of areas have been purchased and protected because and they've been able to raise money to do that because they have those species at risk and we know that they're there. So they can play a role in that level of protection, which is great. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, just to talk about, because I'm talking about bird population changes in decline. I think it's really important just to mention this report, which, and I'll say it right now, which can be found on the Birds Canada website. If you go to birdscanada.org, you can read this whole report. It's the State of Canada's Birds 2019. It's the second State of Canada's Birds report put out by the North American Bird Conservation Initiative. And this involved numerous partners right across Canada, anyone who was sort of collecting any type of bird data. And obviously Birds Canada, Environment Canada, provide the bulk of that data, but there's so many other partners involved in this particular report, which is great, as it should be. And I try not to put graphs in presentations because, like, let's be honest, right? We've all been there. Like it's rough, right? Sometimes with all the graphs that were made to interpret very quickly. So apologies in advance, but I think this is an important one to put in. This is the real snapshot of how Canadian birds are doing in Canada. And this graph tells so many stories that we just do not have time to tell. But it's basically, on the left axis, the average percent change really since 1970. And you've got the timeline on the bottom. And you've got two groups of birds that are doing really well: birds of prey and waterfowl. Why are they doing really well? Because tons of money and numerous stakeholder groups have dedicated time and effort into making sure that waterfowl populations go up and birds of prey go up. Now, birds of prey was a little bit more of a policy decision to help them get up in terms of banning DDT, but waterfowl is tons of habitat conservation work by numerous partners, and not just the typical conservationists. Like, it's conservationists from right across the board, and hunters and fishers played a big part in that as well, which is fantastic. They are two great examples of people from all different sort of interests within the conservation field working together. Boy, we need more of that, right? We need so much more of that on so many levels. So great example of what we can do if we all work together. The ones in the middle are sort of, status quo-ish. I think there's the one major change even from this is that seabird populations continue to decline, and that's going to be something that we're going to see more of, especially for a variety of reasons, climate change being one of them, messing up sea temperatures and all that stuff. But the three groups I want to just focus on here are the three groups of birds across Canada that are in massive decline. Shorebirds, especially Arctic nesting shorebirds that winter in South America, so the real long distance migration champions. Grassland birds, right? But 57% decline in grassland birds since 1970. That is terrifying, right? That is an absolute shock. And aerial insectivores. And the aerial insectivores is a whole group of birds which include, swallows, flycatchers, nighthawks, chimney swifts, anything that catches insects in the air. All are telling a major story, not just about the birds themselves, but what's happening to our biodiversity and what's happening to the quality of our air and water in our habitats. Okay, and I won't dive into this too much here. The one thing I will say is please read this report if you haven't. It's filled with really great stuff including conservation actions, which you can do. But aerial insectivores have had a major decline. And one of the big things that connects things like nighthawks and barn swallows and bank swallows is they all feed on aerial insects. And so one of the first links you can make is that there must really be something going on with the aerial insect population, right? So this is a great example of being able to collect tons of data by tens of thousands of volunteers on a group of birds through a variety of programs like the Breeding Bird Survey and many of our programs. We got lots of data, and then they're all showing this major trend. What's causing the decline? That's what people are now trying to figure out, right? And there's certainly, and I would argue this really is now the DDT crisis of our time, is what's happening to aerial insectivores, and especially some of the ones that people don't know a lot about. And this is a common nighthawk, and this is an example. Again, populations plummeting. The species is being studied a fair bit right now. Some really fantastic work. They winter so far away down in the tropics. They're one of the last spring migrants to return. Look at those wings, right? They're just made for long distance flight, and they're declining at a pretty solid rate. So one of the things that was created to try to answer the questions of where are these declines happening, and are they happening more rapidly in certain areas or in certain habitats, was a nightjar survey. And this was started by Wild Research out in British Columbia. And now it has become a Birds Canada program. So Birds Canada is sort of taking it over, and we're running it nationally to try to answer some of these more detailed questions about this particular species. And what's great is that they're very easy to monitor. And anyone can sort of sign up for the program, get out there, be a citizen scientist, and collect that data so that researchers can then use that data to answer big questions, right? So there are things we can do. And I'll just leave it with grassland birds here too. And I think this is something that people are now aware of. And I know, JC, this is something that I know you're involved in some of the work you do, right? But grasslands are in big trouble. And it's right across the country. Obviously, the Alberta through southern Manitoba is sort of the core grassland range. But grasslands also are an important part of the ecosystem in southern Ontario and in southern Quebec and in parts of the Maritimes, right?
Yeah. I work for the Alderville Black Oak Savanna, so we have about 160 acres of tall grass prairie and black oak savanna habitat. And yeah, the amount of species at risk that we have on site is absolutely incredible, because without that prairie or savanna or grassland habitat for them to go, and any existing remnants in southern Ontario, they're quite small, they're very fragmented and spaced out and highly degraded. So asking a mottled dusky winged butterfly that requires a grassland species to survive to travel even from grassland to remnant grassland could be hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, because there's so little of that habitat type left. So this is definitely one that hits close to home for me, for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I think people need to be more aware of the threat, the value of grasslands and the threat to grasslands. And I think when people drive around, um, well, whether it's in parts of the Canadian prairies or through Southern Ontario, and they see farmland, what they're seeing a lot of is intensive agriculture, and intensive crops and no fallow and no grassland edges, and the intensification of agriculture is really, really started going on another level right around the time when many of these species started declining. And some species like, the bobolink, which, is a polarizing bird, which is such a shame because they're so amazing. But birds like bobolink, because of the massive habitat loss, right? They're absolutely forced to use, because there's no habitat left for them. They have to use areas that are not ideally suited. And a lot of that ends up being in Southern Ontario, hay fields.
Yeah.
And a lot of those get cut down right during nesting season. And their productivity just goes, you can only do that for so long. And that becomes a habitat sink for these birds.
Big practice of agriculture is to limit as many insects as possible from your crop. So whatever means you're using to eliminate those insects, whether they're pesticides or insecticides, I guess specifically, but those two groups that are the biggest decline are the aerial insectivores and the grassland plants. And I know this is where you're going, because it's exactly something that is so important. And you're right, people often drive by, like they see an agricultural field and they go, oh, look at that long grass, that's great for grassland plants, or species. But then sometimes I find people drive by our site, which is like native grassland habitat, and no one really grasps of what they're looking at. It's just another field full of grasses. A wetland is a lot more showy because there's like the water features, the vegetation features. Like I find that that's easier for people to see and kind of observe the biodiversity. But taking a closer look at our grasslands, there's just so much diversity there, whether it's the plants, the herptiles, the birds, the insects, the mammals, such an important indicator of that biodiversity on that area.
Yeah, no, fully agree. Grasslands need a major marketing boost, across the country. People, I think, and then people talk a lot about forests, and forests are important, and planting lots of trees. Yes, all very important. But we have to remember that if you're looking at the world from a biodiversity perspective, whether in Ontario, in southern Quebec, and the prairies, grasslands are a major part of Canadian biodiversity. And I think we're getting there. At least, the fact we're even having the conversation, I think, is a step in the right direction. But yeah, people need to know more. And it's obviously more than birds that rely on grasslands, right? But there's numerous examples. But birds are often, again, sort of that umbrella species or that target species to gain action. Yeah. And this one, the bobolink, is just, again, a good example. And I think there's opportunity here. And before we switch to the next, there's opportunity, right? And I think there's ways to work with the agricultural people within the agricultural field to figure out solutions, right? And there are alternatives, there are solutions, and they don't necessarily cause major hardship in terms of the amount of income that can come in from people working the land, right? There are things that people can do. And one quick example is out here in the prairies, a program that we're working on, that Birds Canada is involved in, is working with the cattle ranching community in order to look at areas and prioritize areas that cattle and cattle ranch lands can actually provide really important grassland habitat for our rarest grassland birds. And in some cases, those cattle ranches are the only remaining habitat for many species like chestnut collared longspur and Sprague's pipit and Baird's sparrow out here on the prairies. So working on incentive programs with those ranches is actually a program that Birds Canada is involved in. So I think that's the way forward, right? Trying to have those positive conversations, trying to find ways forward that benefit the birds, biodiversity, and people's livelihoods, right? We have to take that all into account.
Yeah.
But yeah, grasslands, if you haven't been, go check them out. They're incredible, right? They're absolutely amazing places. Okay, so I'm going to jump in here, and I'm sort of just going to quickly sort of lay out just a few ways that you can help birds at home or in your area. And JC, feel free to pipe in if you want to dive into any of these topics a little bit more. And I think we've already sort of mentioned this one, right? So protecting land to deal with habitat loss. And I think that is exactly the type of work that you're doing in your area near Rice Lake, right? Is sort of protecting an area because grasslands are declining, and then using that as the poster child for what that could look like, right? And that's, yeah. So anyway, that's great that you do that. And obviously, there seems to be a lot more land trusts and organizations across Southern Ontario doing this. And I know, and shout out to the Long Point Basin Land Trust for all the amazing work they're doing in Norfolk County for protecting some of the rarest and most biodiverse regions of which this photo was taken, trying to do the same thing. So, do you want to add anything here, JC, in terms of the importance of protecting land?
Yeah, it's as step one of helping birds, it's a big one for sure. And we do, like you mentioned, we have a lot of people kind of waking up. Like one example near us, we're in the Rice Lake Plains, so kind of a geographical feature that has a lot of the same soils, the same plants, the same animals. And nearby we have Hazel Bird, which is a nature reserve from the Nature Conservancy of Canada. So the Nature Conservancy of Canada has their own initiatives to help restore grasslands. And I'm going to talk about grasslands because that's what I know. But we also have a lot of other areas nearby, like Peters Woods, which is a provincial park, and it has remnant prairie in it. And there's just a lot of there's a lot of ways that we need to improve. Don't get me wrong, but we are getting there. There's subsidies for, like you mentioned, don't cut your first crop. They'll provide you like the economical income you would have had from that first mow to allow for the bobolinks and the meadowlark nest to fully fledge. And there's programs to get seed, grassland specific seed. Forest Ontario has their own branch now that they've just initiated recently called Grasslands Ontario. So there is kind of that wake up of protecting the lands that need to be protected. And I like that you touched on, we often just plant trees and plant trees and plant trees and plant trees, and that's our solution. But there are so many other ecosystems that need attention. Not only just for birds and the biodiversity, but for carbon sequestration. Grasslands are extremely efficient at collecting carbon. I would argue a little bit more efficient than trees because they store the carbon underground where it's safe for decades and decades and decades. So protecting land is just so important. And if you're passionate about wanting to learn some protected areas near you, and go explore them and learn about them, because that's the way that you'll start to care about them is you'll care about what you know.
Yeah, that's right. You care about what you know. That's right. For sure. And I think that's relatable with birds, right? It's people can build those early connections to birds, and you can't. It's tough to conserve something unless you care about it, right? And sometimes in many cases it's starting with that, build those connections to the natural world, because and yeah, again, birds can do that. That's why birds are so incredible. They can help build those connections. Yeah, excellent. Okay, let's switch to just a few others here. Being a bird-friendly consumer. This is just one example here. I could list numerous examples, and we sort of touched on one in terms of grass-fed beef. Is sort of a next one. Is a way that you're actually supporting grassland conservation in those areas that actually are very important, again, to some of our rarest prairie birds out here. So grass-fed beef is another way you could do this. And again, a program we're working on and a certification that's in the making. But the one that a lot of people know associated with birds is bird-friendly coffee, right? And there's lots of different coffee out there. And again, we can spend an hour just talking about coffee and people's lack of understanding of how coffee comes about. but the bottom line is that most coffee that's grown in the tropics is grown in areas where the entire ecosystem has been slashed and burned. And then they've replaced a tropical forest with coffee, and it grows like, corn or soybean on hillsides. And that is obviously terrible for the environment, terrible for the birds that are there. It's basically wiping out habitat. And it doesn't have to be your only choice when you're drinking coffee. And so there's, of all the certifications, there's only one that is basically guaranteed to be bird friendly, and that is the Smithsonian bird friendly habitat certification. This is third party verified. People actually go to the sites, monitor the birds, and this is also, it's not just shade grown, but it's primarily shade grown coffee here. So coffee grown within a forest environment that still provides habitat for many other things, but it also reduces chemical use and all sorts of things. So if you are a coffee lover, and you want to make a conservation statement, and you can afford it, spend the extra couple bucks and get, Smithsonian bird friendly certified coffee. And Birds and Beans is a great place, an easy way to get it. But Balzac's has a variety as well. There's all sorts of people that provide this certification going forward. So strongly recommend that, because again, you're making a conservation choice by doing this, right? Okay, and so we've been talking about protecting habitat and the value of like prioritizing important habitat. Well, one thing you can do at home is prioritize the habitat if you have a yard, and if this is available. And I know a lot of people don't have yards, but if you do have a yard, consider making it bird friendly. And one of the great things that that Birds Canada just launched just a few weeks ago is our new birdgardens.ca resource, where it basically goes through with videos and tools, and including what native species you should be growing or planting in your yard, no matter where you live in the country. So it's a really fantastic resource right now. So I highly recommend going to birdgardens.ca and check out the videos and the resources. And it's just really well done. Huge shout out to my coworkers, Gregor Beck and Natasha Barlow, for spending tons of time on this, and to Greg McLaughlin at Work Cabin for doing an incredible job on these videos. He's just a superstar. If anyone out there knows Greg, really did a fantastic job working with us on this. So make your yard bird friendly. It's easy. You plant native stuff. You're creating habitat for birds. It can be food supply for the birds year round. And again, if you have a yard, this is really something to consider. Now, in trying to make your yard, Jason, you want to jump in there? Yeah.
To the garden point, part of my title or position at the Black Oak Savannah is I'm the garden and outreach coordinator. So we have about a half-acre interpretive garden on site that's all native species, but we have one section that's called the bird orchard. And it's as simple as have some plants that produce a lot of seeds. We have some thistles in there because goldfinches in this area use the thistle tufts in their nests to keep the eggs warm. We have a lot of shrubs with berries that the birds love to eat. So we kind of did a nice balance of food and habitat for birds in this bird orchard. But in reality, our entire garden, because it's all native species to our local area, is habitat and resources for birds. So I think that's so important that you have bird garden zone to find the native plants that appeal and apply to the birds in your local area, because so often it's very confusing of what native species are native to your zone or your province. Or in Southern Ontario, we have different native species than Northern Ontario, but a species could be native to Ontario. So it's quite challenging to nail that information down. So I will definitely be checking this resource out.
Yeah, and I think you're right. That is the big challenge, isn't it? Figuring out what native species. And there's lots of resources in the United States. There was really nothing in Canada. And so now we have it. And it's really, it's excellent. Even if birds are not your focus, that resource is the perfect thing in terms of you want to plant native stuff. And it's important, you know, and we could probably go on about my favorite native stuff. Like, give me choke cherries any day of the week out here. Like the choke cherries are just, the birds nest in them, they feed on them year round. It's amazing habitat. You know, choke cherries, serviceberry. Anyway, we can go on, but there's a lot of great stuff out there. And plant shrubs, right? Like, it's not just trees. Think about that structure, you know. And there's an entire video about that on here as well. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Please go check it out. But when you're creating a bird-friendly yard and a bird-friendly environment around your house, you know, there are a couple things we need to discuss, you know, and one of them is cats, right? And cats, you know, cats are, you know, the single largest human-caused mortality factor for birds. You know, it's the biggest, well, it's just the most significant negative impact on bird populations that we are causing directly by our actions. You know, and this is obviously outside, you know, climate change and habitat loss, which are obviously a result of our actions. But this is something we can do. And just, you know, and I think people have seen the numbers, right? But it's in Canada alone, it's 100 to 350 million birds per year are killed by outdoor cats. You know, that is more significant than anything else combined in terms of ongoing risks from power lines, from cars, from wind turbines, like you name it, you add all those together, you're not going to get the number that you're going to get with cats. So, and it's very simple what to do, right? It's, you just keep your cats inside, you know, you keep your cats inside, or you build a catio, you know, or you have supervised outdoor time with your cats, whether it's on a leash or something like that. It's certainly not anti-cat, you know, and there's a lot of advocates out there that agree with this, you know, that cats outside have a really tough go, right? It's really not good for cats outside either. Keeping cats inside keeps them safer and healthier. There are ways, and you can, and catios are the thing, right? And building sort of these outdoor little pens for cats to get some fresh air outside are, and they are, obviously this is just the starting point. They get a lot more elaborate from here. So something to keep in mind when you're thinking about bird-friendly yard, right, is keeping your cats inside. Window collisions is another one, right? This is something we hear a lot about. In Canada, it's you know, greater than 25 million per year birds killed by windows per year. That number, you know, could be as high as 40 or more million per year. And there's obviously numerous organizations doing a great job getting awareness for this. And, you know, shout out to the Fatal Light Awareness Program and the great people there, Mike Major, really getting the word out about how windows can kill birds. And I think, and one thing I always like to say with this one is that we often, the way it's sort of portrayed, a lot of people think that it's only just sort of the big high-rise buildings in downtown Toronto or Ottawa that kill the majority of that 25 million per year. And some of them are really significant killers of birds, there's no question. But in fact, the bulk of that number comes from people's houses and people's offices right across the country, right? And that's where you're getting it. It's people's houses that kill 1 or 2 birds per year, every year. And you multiply that across the entire population, that's where you're getting the number from. So it's not just a big city issue, okay? And there are more ways now than ever to prevent this. And this is my coworker Ellen here putting up the feather-friendly dots, you know, do-it-yourself kit, feather-friendly do-it-yourself kit, which is not that expensive. It's really easy to do on Windows. You can make your own window saver called a Copian bird savers, where you basically get parachute cord. You buy just like a string of parachute cord, and you can make vertical hanging strips on glass. They're about a maximum of 4 inches apart. It costs really not that much at all. You could get it just from like Walmart or Canadian Tire to build that. There's lots of different things you can do. And even just starting with trying to figure out which windows kill birds. If you have windows that you know you're going to get that you're seeing bird collisions, then you need to put something on there. And that thing should not be the hawk or falcon black decal that fits on a window. That does not work. That has never worked. That is not enough. You need to cover your window. And these dots are great because they do that. They break up the reflection. Birds are seeing reflections in the windows, right? They're not thinking they can fly through your house. if there's a window that's reflecting a bush or a tree, and they think they can fly into that tree into the reflection, that's how they're hitting your windows, or why they're hitting your windows. Okay, so that often means it's not even all of your windows in your house. It's usually just a few, right? So again, if you're making your yard bird friendly and you're keeping your cat in, you're planting native trees, you also have to consider the window use and what you can do. Okay.
Yeah, we have these at our office now because funnily that you mentioned those little black bird silhouettes. We actually had a bunch of crows that would come and try to attack the black outline silhouettes on our windows, to the point where the birds were getting like injured. Then
Wow.
we'd have things, yeah, we would come in and there'd be like blood across the window from them trying to mark their territory, of course, as birds and other animals in the animal kingdom do. And we would have things like dark-eyed juncos flying into our windows all the time, and a lot of other finch species. And we got these dots installed last fall, and we have not had a single bird. And we work on a grassland. There's birds everywhere, and we used to have a couple birds a week that they wouldn't all die from hitting the window, but they'd hit the window. And we haven't had a single bird collide in the past year. So these work. I can put my stamp of approval on them.
Yeah, and you know what? And you don't notice them.
No, we still work
After like about a
years.
minute of looking at your window, you don't even notice them, right?
Yeah.
That's the great thing about these dots.
Yeah, we can even use our binoculars still and look through the windows.
Oh, yeah.
And that's totally fine. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, no, it's great. And thanks for sharing that crow story. I've never heard of that happening before. That is really interesting. And yeah, God, love crows. Do we have enough time to talk about how much I love crows? They're just the best. I love it when like sometimes get a pair of crows in the yard, and they're so amazing. Crows. Oh, just they do not get the love that they should. They are just such wicked birds. Okay, and this is the last one. And I think in many ways it's as important as some of these other conservation actions. And it's getting to know and sharing your love of birds, right? If you're already a birder, if you're already into birds, spread that around, get other people on it, like show people how easy it is to get involved in birds. There's so many great resources. There's new clubs all the time, and several new ones starting up right now, built on the goals of inclusivity, to get people out into nature. There are lots of opportunities. There's lots of resources. And, just to touch on the point we've talked about a couple times, right? It's really tough to conserve something unless you care about it, right? And if you want to build that care, you need to build connections to nature, and birds can be one of the best ways, not the only way, but one of the best ways to build those connections, right? And people seeing their first northern cardinal for the first time, or their first, Swainson's hawk out here on the prairies, like seeing a bird up close for the first time can have a really transformative experience. So getting to know your birds is just a great starting point with your family, with your friends, and you don't need a lot, pair of binoculars. There's free field guide options. You can often get any field guide you want from a public library to test it out. There are great field guide apps out there. And there's lots of great tools to learn your birds right now. The Merlin Bird ID app is a great free one to learn your bird ID. And just get out there, and once you start down this path, and just like, obviously just a heads up, right? Like once you start down this path of discovering birds, you will quickly discover it's just a wildly addictive hobby, and it'll just consume your entire life, right? Like all you want to do is find more birds and see what else is out there. And anywhere you go in the world, all of a sudden there's cool new birds to see, and your entire travel schedule gets completely hijacked by birds. This is a real thing that will happen to you, and it's wonderful, and that birds have that ability. And of course, the outcome of this is that there will be, hopefully, if people build those connections, start participating in programs, which we'll talk about in a second, but they'll want to donate to support land conservation. They'll want to buy bird-friendly coffee and start putting up feather friendly markers on windows that are hurting birds. They'll start making those choices. They'll start advocating for bigger policy changes, which could affect birds, whether that deals with pesticide use or land destruction in certain areas. Those are the outcomes, and then that does have a benefit for biodiversity, right? Because it's engaged people. And just for me as an example, certainly birds for sure have been sort of the focal point of really my entire life. But I'm really into other things as well. And in terms of botany and insects and identifying things, and sometimes bird is sort of that gateway, that subject matter to get you in the door. And then all of a sudden, you're trying to identify all those night singing insects outside your window, or you get hooked on butterflies or identifying grasses and sedges, which I've not got to yet. Maybe I'll get to the sedges part, but so far that's a bit outside my reach. But anyway, it's really just the start of the journey once you get to know birds.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention quickly,
yep.
when you said that often you can get a field guide and rent it or whatever, borrow it from your library. I know of a lot of areas, not currently, but you can borrow binoculars as well. There's a lot of binocular lending programs at libraries and local areas. So you truly can get all the equipment you need, and it's just those two things. Or even if you don't want to get the field guide and use an app, you've probably already got a phone, you just need some binos. So the resources are definitely in place to help you get there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously shout out to our website, birdscanada.org, for lots of good tips and tricks for getting into birding. Mm-hmm. And if people doubt the magic in the ability to hook birds, like this is don't these photos from pre-pandemic just look like a world that seems alien now, doesn't it? Like this many people together in a room. But this is from many years ago, a program where we were banding northern saw-whet owls at Long Point Bird Observatory, and I wanted to get the local grade 4 students to come down to the observatory at night, and it just took forever to make that happen. And we finally got the entire class to come down on a Friday night with all their parents and their pets. And they all came down. It was like 50 plus people to see saw-whet owl banding. Now, obviously, they weren't around the nets and doing all that kind of stuff. But when we finally got a saw-whet owl, and this is all of these people, parents, kids, everyone, seeing this bird for the very first time, had no idea. Parents had no idea why they were doing this, right? Like they were super skeptical, right, about this field trip. And once we finally got one, and you can just see it on the kids' faces, right? This was a transformative moment. And I know from many of these kids and parents, even years afterwards, they talk about this experience and how it really had a major impact. So birds can really do that. Okay, so let's end off with ways that people can support bird conservation and by getting involved. And so the term citizen science, so these are volunteer-based programs that use volunteers out there collecting data so that researchers can use that massive amount of data to do either research with, or to do, ideally achieve conservation goals with that data, to inform policy changes or land use changes or whatever. So citizen science in this regard is tons of volunteers collecting data for researchers to be able to do work with. Researcher-generated, research-directed volunteer research. That's what this is. Now, there are many examples of this program, whether it's using iNaturalist, Plant Watch. There's all sorts of types of citizen science programs and community science programs out there that all have different goals and different ways of collecting data. But really, birds and bird programming is sort of really on the front edge of what citizen science was, and birds played a major role in the first citizen science programs and really around the world, right? Citizen science is sort of found and done all over the world because it's the most efficient way to collect lots of data. You can't have professional biologists out there collecting data. And in fact, there's been several papers showing that the volunteer collected data is as good, if not better, than the data you collect just from the professional biologists going out and doing it, because people usually that are really into birds and really know their birds, they want to do something to help give back. right? And this is the way they can apply their significant skill set into trying to help birds. So these are programs like the Christmas Bird Count, which you could argue is one of the earliest citizen science programs ever, right? And in Canada, Birds Canada coordinates the Christmas Bird Count with Audubon. We have programs like eBird, right? And we have a dedicated Canadian site, eBird Canada, ebird.ca, if people wanted to check that out, where you can basically submit observations everywhere. But the ones I want to focus on here are sort of the entry level ones. So if you're just getting into birds and you want to give this sort of volunteer monitoring program thing a try, the Project Feeder Watch is a great winter activity for people to participate in, because you basically are watching your birds in your yard. You don't even have to have a feeder, right? You're just watching the birds in your yard and keeping track of them every weekend. You could enter it. We have an app, the Project Feeder Watch app. It's a program that we coordinate. Actually, it's a program that we started right here in Southern Ontario. That's now. Feeder Watch is a great family-friendly entry-level citizen science program in the winter months, November through April. In February, we have the Great Backyard Bird Count, which is just growing exponentially in terms of the number of people using it. It's just incredible how popular that program was this past February. It was just amazing number of Canadians participating. And in fact, Ontario had the highest participation rate of any region of the entire world. There were more people actually entering checklists in Ontario than in the state of California, which is crazy considering how many more people live in California than all of Canada, right? So just to show you how popular this is to Canadians, these programs are massively, massively popular, and you don't have to be a bird expert to start at all. So there's some great entry-level ones to get started. For a full list of programs to get involved in, like I said, visit our website, birdscanada.org. And the best thing to do is just to get started, right? Get started and start participating and build that connection with birds. So that's it. That's all the things I want to talk about. And we've done it over a much longer period of time than I was planning on. So, but JC, is there anything you want to dive into a little bit more before we wrap up?
I honestly don't think so. I think we covered everything that I wanted to chat about. And I really hope that those of you that are watching take this opportunity to visit birdscanada.org and check out their citizen science tools that they have. Jody was only able to dive into just a few of the many amazing citizen science programs that are going to be, or that are available to you, whether you want to go out and find an area and go birding, or if you just want to sit in your yard and watch your backyard for an hour, make sure that you count all the birds and learn some identification skills. We've talked so much about how seeing the birds that are in an area can be an indicator of the food sources that are there, the healthy habitat. And if the bird's absent, if you start to learn and really dive in and you're walking through the woods and say, this is a really great black-capped chickadee habitat, like why are there none here? Then that's a really good indicator also that maybe you need to dive a bit deeper into that area that you're visiting and see if there's anything you can do to help. So I just wanted to thank you so much, Jody. That was a wealth of knowledge, and I'm so happy that we could have Birds Canada join us for our citizen science and community science programming that we're sharing with the Ontario Biodiversity Council for this summit. And I just wanted to extend my most sincere thank you for joining.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's always great to talk birds, and so thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. And I hope people do get involved and lots of great opportunities specifically in Ontario, right? There's the next Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas just launched, right? So there's great opportunities to participate in a program that I love participating in. It's a great way to build skills and to learn more. And I mentioned the Nighthawk survey earlier. That season's coming really soon, and there are definitely opportunities to participate in the Nighthawk survey in Ontario. And again, people can find that information on our website. So just to pull from one of the things that I talked about here. But anyway, thanks very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Amazing. Thank you.